Mr. McQuaid? Welcome. How are you? Sorry, we had a technical glitch and you couldn't hear us. Kicking things off, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Eric just did an intro to the conversation that both of you are here to have with us, and suggested that you go ahead and jump in first.
Okay. Well, I just want to start out by saying I really appreciate Eric's invitation. It's been years since I had given one of these briefings to the Boise City Council, and I missed it, and I was just really excited when Eric called and asked if I would be willing to come back again. And so Eric, thank you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. Eric and I just had gone back and forth a little bit. Should I do it virtual or in person? And I had a 3 o'clock meeting with the commissioners, and it actually went just until about 20 minutes to 3. So it was just as well that I decided to do this virtually. It saved me from having to race down there. And by the way, the commissioners wanted me to give you their best and to say hello. This presentation is going to be a little bit different than what I've done in past for not only for Boise City, but even just in the recent past. That I tend to spend more time on the numbers and not so much as a narrative. This year, it's going to be just the opposite. I'm going to spend probably more time on the narrative than I will the numbers. But I do know we have, I believe it's 40 minutes allocated time, and I usually go about 15 minutes. So maybe we'll have a little more time for the numbers. But right now, I want to spend more time on the narrative. And it's what I want to talk about. I'm just going to make just a couple of prefatory remarks in just a moment, and then I'll get into the meat of this discussion. We'll talk about residential total value, residential values, and then I want to talk about what's driving these values in the eyes of the assessor's office and my appraisers and my own eyes. Talk briefly about commercial, new construction, and urban renewal, and then I want to spend a little more time on something that everybody seems to be talking about, and it's misunderstood by just about everybody who's talking about it, and that is tax burden. And hopefully I can shed some light on that and put that into a better perspective than it is being discussed today. Just a couple of comments before I get into the numbers. I am constantly being asked, in fact, just the last weekend, somebody said, oh, so the county's going to get all of this extra money now because the values are going up. Well, that's not the case. I hear people say that you're the treasurer. I just wrote you a check. That's not the case either. The assessor has a very specific job regarding the taxation here in Idaho. And that is, the assessor's office is to allocate the taxes. That's our sole purpose. We don't collect them. I don't raise them because you need more or lower them because you need less. But my job is to allocate taxes. And for the county, for example, the county is going to set a budget. And as what I've done or will do by setting market values, I'm going to decide how much each piece of property or each property owner will pay of that total tax bill based upon my estimate of their value. And that's the value as of January 1st. A lot of people are confused about how we do the valuations. So I'd just like to spend just a moment and just tell you how we calculate the values. Residential in particular is how we do our residential appraisals is we will take a look at all of the sales last year. We had about 13,000 sales in Ada County last year. So we'll take all of those sales and we'll time adjust those to January 1st of this year. Then for each of those 13,000 parcels, we will compare that adjusted value to the assessed value for each parcel. And if, as a group, and we do this by neighborhoods, if values went up, if the sales price January 1st exceeded our assessed value by, we'll say 20%, then we will take that neighborhood or that area and we will increase that by the 20%. And so that's how we do the residential property. Commercial is a little bit different and much more difficult because we don't have the information is not as forthcoming from the commercial property owners as it is from the residential property owners. The next point I would like to make is that there is really not a one-to-one correspondence between the increase in assessed values and, of course, the increase in taxes. Now, some years it gets to be pretty close, and we have about a 4% increase in values, and if taxes, all the budgets go up at 3%, there'll be a slight increase there. But in a year that we're looking at now, where we're looking at values that going up 25%, there's certainly not going to be a 25% increase in taxes. And I'm really trying to get this point across to people that there is not a one correspondence between the increase in value and increase in taxes. Now, typically there is an increase in taxes, so people just automatically assume that is because of the increase in the values. But there's a lot more to it than that. And just before I get going into the numbers here, is how close are our values to the selling prices? Typically on residential, we're about 98% of the sales price. Commercial, we're about 93 or 94%. And again, there's some factors, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, what causes that difference. So if there aren't any questions at this point, I'll just go ahead and just jump in, and we'll look at total market value in Boise City this year. It's $43 billion. And also, I would like to apologize for not having any slides. The person who usually prepares my slides, he has been assisting us in straightening out the difficulties with motor vehicles. It has been really challenging for me, for my chief deputy, and for our analyst. And we just really have not had a chance to devote time to the slides, which would be nice. But when we are turning 200 people away at motor vehicles because we don't have the capacity to handle them, that's where all of our attention is being devoted right now. Although things are getting better at motor vehicles, don't get me wrong. The total market value for Boise City is $43 billion, and that's not the taxable value, that's the market value. And that's up 23% over last year's $35 billion. But that's not the taxable value. The taxable value, we need to make some adjustments to what you would actually be able to levy taxes against. The first number we have to look at is the homestead exemption, and that is at $7 billion. We need to take that out of that $43 billion because that's not going to go into the calculation. Everybody knows now the homestead exemption was increased to $125,000 this year, and that's effective as of this year. Something new this year is the homestead exemption can be applied for all year round. Last year and prior years, you had to apply for it by April 15th. But this year, it has changed. The legislation went into effect, and you can apply up to December 31st for the homestead exemption. So we take out the homestead exemption, $7 billion. We have to take out any other outstanding exemptions. As of right now, that's about $263 million. Our commissioners, they are the ones who have to approve all exemptions, and they have to get those numbers to me by May 15th. The numbers I'm using right now are good as of May 12th. So that $263 million, it might materialize, or they may have gotten everything to me, but that's going to be pretty close when you look at the total budget that you have and the total number of volume of exemptions. So we've taken out the homestead exemption, other outstanding exemptions that have not been processed yet. And then we add back in operating property. Operating property is property that's owned by the utilities, and that's assessed by the State Tax Commission, and it's assessed on a unitary basis. In other words, the Tax Commission will, let's take Union Pacific, for example. That's a classic example. They have railroad tracks and they have cars and whatnot here in Idaho. Is how they value that is they will value the entire company, well, almost as if one were going to be valuing the company to test the value of a stock or something like that. And then they break that out into how much of that value is in the state of Idaho. They then start to allocate that and reduce that down by tax code area. In the case of Union Pacific, it would be how many line miles or miles of track there are, we'll say, in Boise City. And they would take that portion times the value that's allocated to Idaho, and that's how they derive the value for operating property. That doesn't get to us until August. So we use last year's value as a proxy for this year's value, and that brings us to the potential taxable value. And to me, this is what you would be taxing against. And that's just about $36.4 billion. And And that's just about a 22% increase over last year's. Just drilling down in that just a little bit. In Boise City, you have 85,000 residential parcels, and that's about a 2% increase over last year's 83,000. The total market value of residential, this is total market value, not the tax value, it's $33 billion. That's up about 25% over the previous years. Median increase on single family residential existing is 25%. And I don't know if that's really a surprise to you or not. To a lot of people, they are aware of what's been going on. MLS for the same period has a range of between 26 and 30%. So we're a little bit less than what MLS says. So I feel comfortable with that 25% median increase. By the way of comparison, in Boise City last year, it was a 6% increase. So there's a considerably larger increase than last year. Single family residential, and this is all of Ada County. We don't have it broken down by different geographic areas, but it's just about 400,000 is the median value for Ada County for as of January 21st. It's about 40,000 less than MLS's number. And I'm not really too concerned about that difference. If it was, we'll say 75 or 100,000, then I would have cause for concern. Primarily concern on my end of it that we have missed something that is a pretty significant factor in the market. At this point, I would just kind of like to just go into just a brief narrative here, and that is why what we see has been going on in the market and why we have this. To me, in my experience here as the assessor, and perhaps even in prior history, we've had this unprecedented 25% increase in single-family residential in just a single year. It's first of all, last year we had 13,500 sales. We've never had anything close to that before. I think maybe 11,500 was probably the largest number I'd ever seen before, but 13,500 in a year when the economy was really facing some real strong headwinds, and we had the pandemic we were trying to deal with. So that to me is just an amazing number in light of those conditions. We had 3,700 new homes that were occupied last year. That compared to the previous year, 2019 was 4,700, about 4,700. So we had fewer newer homes occupied last year. That certainly added to this shortage. Of course, low interest rates, that certainly plays into this. It's when someone's buying a home, most people, it's not, is it a $400,000 house or $600,000 house? It's how much can I afford on a monthly payment? And of course, as interest rates go down, then you can get a larger loan. But low interest rates, that's just part of the equation. The other equation is a lot of people are moving into the area and they're paying cash. They're selling their homes in California or Washington or Oregon, Utah even. They're walking away with significant amounts of cash, and they're getting into bidding wars, cash bidding wars, as houses go on the market. Someone had related an experience to me the other day. A for sale sign went up on a house in his neighborhood earlier in the day. That evening, he was out going out for a walk, and he saw a group of people, and it appeared that they were haggling over the prices there before the first full day of listing. So they really aren't on the market very long. As soon as something, a for sale sign goes up, even before that, sometimes the bidding war starts, and the cash bidders usually are more successful than those who've had to are going to be borrowing to cover their cost. Also,
I've wondered if you could, this is something that many Boiseans are experiencing. I think those of us or in our community that are looking for homes are know well how difficult it is right now to get into that into the market. Could you relate that to your practices with regard to assessing value? Because one thing that we would really like to ensure that our residents understand is how the assessor's office is looking at the market today, is looking at the balance of residential and commercial, and then what we can expect and how that factors into the levies and budget that we as a city will be developing, that Eric will speak to next.
For that was it, Madam Mayor. I don't know if to be honest, a whole bunch of questions in there. I guess I'll give a general answer and see if that helps at all. If not, we can have another follow-up question. But what we do is we just look at all of the sales, and we do not look at cash sales or finance sales. We just look at all of the sales, and that is we use again adjust that to January 1st. And that is the determinant of what the value would be for that property as of January 1st. Does that help at all? I'm sorry.
Well, I think that that's what the public really needs to know is what you're looking at and how you're making the decisions on assessments as that relates to the taxes and they see when they pick up their bill.
Right. The most important thing to us is we have to be at market value. As of January 1st of that tax year, and that's all by statute. In fact, I've heard some kind of a rumbling that there's somebody out there who's really unhappy with what we're doing, and he's going to start some kind of a movement where we have to lower the values down. Well, the problem is if we were to lower the values down, and let's say we were to go below 90%, we have to be at 100% plus or minus 10. The state tax commission will come in and they will it's not a reappraisal, but they will do an equalization, and they will, let's say if we were down at 89%, the tax commission could come in and raise it up to 90% or to 91%, whatever they thought would be appropriate. Of course, this takes a period of time to happen, but it has happened. And the problem when they do an equalization, when they equalize values like that, no one has opportunity to appeal. So let's say if I follow this person's advice, I went below the 25, 26%, and we were found to be out of compliance, the tax commission will raise those back up. So that's really important. I think a lot of people seem to fail to realize we have to be at market value as of January 1st. And in fact, the tax commission in March of next year, they're going to do what they call a ratio study. They're going to take those 13,500 sales we had last year, and they're going to test those to see if we were in fact at least 90% of that. Single family residential, we're usually right around 97, 98%. So we're pretty close there. And a lot of that has to do with the fact we have 13,500 sales. We can build really robust models with samples like that. On commercial property, we don't have that luxury. The information nearly is not as free flowing on the commercial side as it is on residential.
Sir, thank you so much for the information you provided. If you would indulge me, this is very confusing. And so I'm going to ask a question.
Please do.
It might sound like a very simple question, but so you said so far in your presentation that when it comes to calculating property values, that you have difficulty getting information from the commercial part. Can you explain that a little bit about why you're able to get that from residential and not so much from commercial? Because I think it's pretty well known in our community that there is an imbalance. And to learn now that not as forthcoming, I believe is the term you used when it comes to commercial. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, Councilman Sanchez, I will. First of all, let me say one thing that really helps us with the residential property is we have access to the MLS sales. So we share our sales information, MLS shares their information with us, but that does not include the commercial. The commercial, we have to go out and we have to ask for the information. Commercial they're much more astute. They have people who are paid to manage their property taxes, and they're aware of the laws. When we ask somebody on a form, how much did you pay for your house on we'll say a homeowner's exemption form, they'll just say, I paid $375,000. Commercial, they wouldn't even answer that at all. And commercial, the way we value commercial is more on the income approach. So you have to get income information. And of course, they're very reluctant to sell that. So in answer to your question, information is a lot more free flowing on the residential side than it is on the commercial side. And that's why it's much more difficult.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sir, thank you very much for your presentation. One of the things I think that people need, the people who are trying to get their head around their property tax bill and particularly the changes in it need to understand is the relationship between commercial and residential properties. And so you walked us through 36.4 billion in taxable residential value in Boise, and you explained that that's 85,000 parcels. And then you'd explained that there's been a median increase in that value, so median spread across everyone of about 25%, but that's only on the residential side. So can you give me the same numbers for the commercial side?
Yes, I was just going to get into the commercial in just a moment, if I may. I just want to
No, sir, just a second. The council president has a question.
okay.
Thanks, Bob. Before you go on to the commercial, and maybe you'll answer this when you talk about commercial. I think I heard you say early on that the valuations on residential property are close to 98% of what you think the valuation will be, but commercial is only 92 or 93%. Wonder if you could explain that disparity and explain, especially in a time when prices are increasing so fast, that you'd be so close to the 100% on residential when residential is the property that's experiencing the shift in tax burden.
Yes. First of all, it's last year, there's going to be a slight digression. Last year, for the first time, the commercial and residential were both at about 95%, 94%. And we thought that's the way it should be. But commercial or residential is going up again this year. Commercial is actually going up significantly more. I say typically in the past, commercial goes up about 4%. We're increasing commercial about 11%. And commercial is a very different market, very, very different market than the residential. And why don't we just go in, we'll go into that. I'll save these other marks if we have some extra time here. Okay, commercial is just about $10 billion. There's about a 19.5% increase this year in the commercial. Median change in value is 11.5%. And that's the median value. There's on residential property, the percent change in residential property, literally from the $300,000 parcel to the $3 million parcel, they're all experiencing about a 25%, about a 25% increase. It's a very narrow range on the percent changes and the different pricing levels. Commercial is very different this year. Commercial properties in the like restaurants, in the service industries, they are really struggling. I don't have what those values are, but they're really struggling. They're not nearly as high as 11%. On the other hand, apartments are going to see the way we're looking at it right now is it's a significant increase, probably maybe 30% increase. I've never seen a commercial increase like that before, but the appraiser has the data. Now, why is it that commercial residential will say is at 98% and commercial is at 93, 94? My appraisers are very reluctant to change values without the data. And this gets to be very problematic. We had an area last year, all $1 million homes, over $1 million homes. And the values had not been going up, just been creeping up over a period of about 3 or 4 years. And they appealed, the whole subdivision appealed, because they went up more than neighboring communities went up. Well, the neighboring communities, we had lots of sales. So when we have lots of sales, it's easy for us to establish what our increase is going to be. Well, in this particular neighborhood, there weren't any sales for several years. And so when an appraiser goes in to defend an appeal, and they don't have anything to compare it with, they're much more reluctant to be real aggressive on that. But this is something that we're correcting this year. And that is that no appraiser can just let the area just go without changes. Now, also, I'm going to say this, that we're also asking our commercial appraisers to be, you know, I don't want to say aggressive. I think might be sound like a bit punitive. It's not that at all. But I guess take a little more risk, go a little bit higher percentage, knowing that you're going to get some pushback. Does that help at all?
Thank you. It did. I just know that our residents are going to continue to be concerned about the shift from commercial to residential in terms of the overall tax burden.
Yes.
And want to understand what, if any, tools you have that might help us ameliorate that a bit.
Yeah. I hope I've given you enough. If not, we could get back. I could work with Eric with an explanation. And I do want to talk about the tax burden, as I said a minute ago.
And Bob,
yeah.
we are super tight on time, so I'm going to ask that you do this. And we've got just 10 more minutes for you and Eric combined.
Okay, got it.
So the tax burden I'd like you to address, as
Okay.
I'm sure the public would like to hear your take on that.
Great.
And
Yes.
then I'm going to move it on to Eric, and I'm going to ask that if council members have additional questions, that they compile them through Amanda. We
Okay.
send them to you and we get them answered.
I'm sorry, I thought I had 40 minutes. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that it was both Eric and myself. So we'll talk about tax burden. That's is really interesting. Residential tax burden in Boise City is 68%. And that is up from 65% last year. So there's definitely a shift there. It's going up. But one reason why there's the difference between the tax burden between residential and commercial, some of it really makes a lot of sense when you look at it in context. So for example, we have just about 85,000 residential parcels in Boise City. That is 7.5 times the number of commercial properties in Boise City. Again, 7.5 times. So you have a lot more residential property than you have commercial property. So that is a big factor explaining that. And also we got residential is 33 billion, commercial is 10.5 billion. So you've got 3 times the value in residential property. So it's the increasing value that's causing that departure between commercial and residential. During the recession, 2007, 2008, they were very, very close, residential and commercial property. Do exemptions play a part? Yeah, they do. Exemptions certainly play a part. But I would also, we need to keep in mind that the homeowner's exemption is 61% of the total exemptions in the county. So that's a big number. I just want to end up this discussion with one thing. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and that is that are we at 97% and 94%, or last year 94% for both residential and commercial? To me, the more important thing is the level of assessment. Are we all at 97% or 98%? So when we were down to 93% with commercial, that really was not acceptable. And that's another reason why we're really wanting to see that level of assessment on commercial get up there. So Madam Mayor, Council President, that's all. Those are all my comments this year. And thank you so much for your patience. And I'll stick around for a few minutes if you want me to for follow-up questions after Eric.
Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I have a slide deck. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly. Some of these points the assessor made. Is that a little better? Thank you. And we're going to pull up the deck in a moment. As that's going through, I'll just speak. So I just wanted to highlight that as part of this past legislative session, that there were a number of bills that impacted property tax. There was a bill that requires uniform accounting, budgeting, and financial reporting procedures. That came out of last year's interim property tax committee. The legislature has the goal of having all local agencies report all of their financial information in the hope that having it in a central repository will lead to some sort of financial savings down the line. The interim committee that existed last year has been continued again. So we will see that interim committee meet again this summer. The legislature approved an expansion of the property tax deferral program, which is essentially a loan program allowing folks to take state funds in return for a future payment on their property tax. And then the largest thing, House Bill 389, and we can talk about this maybe in another setting, had numerous impacts to property tax law, one of which the assessor mentioned was the increase to homeowners exemption. There were also several elements of that law that will reduce collections for municipalities. The assessor talked about this point, so I won't belabor it, but overall, city collections on property taxes are capped at 3% on a year-over-year basis for base collections, plus an allowance for new construction and annexation. So when any individual property owner sees very significant year-over-year increases on their property taxes, that doesn't correlate to the same level or same percentage of increase on city collections. I think that's just an important note and one that we get questions about quite a lot. Really what that represents is that individual property owner's slice of the overall property tax pie increasing. As a matter of fact, if you look back at the last 5 years at the average year-over-year collection in property tax, is approximately 4%. Just a handful of quick statistics to build upon the points made by the assessor. Over the last several years, over the last 5 years, residential on average has increased within the city of Boise by about 17.5%, whereas commercial, and these numbers are net of new construction, commercial has increased by about 9%. The average home within the city of Boise is increasingly subject to property tax due to the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption. So if you look back to fiscal year 2017 or tax year 2016, the average home in the city of Boise was $226,000, of which approximately 58% was subject to property tax. Using the most recent numbers provided by the assessor, the average home is $455,000. Even with the $125,000 homeowner's exemption, 73% of that home is subject to property tax. A note that we frequently make is that we'd like to see the homeowner's exemption return to an indexing formula. And had the homeowner's exemption continued to be indexed, it would be approximately $150,000 going into fiscal year 22, which would reduce the amount of that same average home in fiscal year 22 subject to taxation from 73% to 67%.
Madam Mayor, real quickly, Eric, the homeowner's exemption, if I remember correctly, from a policy standpoint, at average value was supposed to equal 50% of the value, exempt up to 50%. And so at 73%, we've lost 25% of the value of the exemption essentially with this run up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the original intent, as I understand it, of the homeowner's exemption was it was 100,000 or 50% of the home value.
Yeah.
Obviously in Ada County with home values much higher than that, it hasn't tracked with that. An important note to make is that within the city of Boise and in many other areas throughout the state, we can expect property taxes to increase when the bills are received later on this calendar year. And that's regardless of the amount of increase or no increase taken in the budget by whatever municipality we're talking about. One-time relief was available in fiscal year 21 through the governor's property tax relief program, which was available to the city of Boise because the city council did not increase property taxes as part of this past fiscal year process. That one-time relief will be rolling off as part of the upcoming fiscal year. So not only did the city of Boise participate in that program, but also Ada County. So the relief from both of those agencies, of which all homeowners in Boise pay property taxes to both, will be rolling off. The other thing is we are going to continue to see burden shift from commercial to residential, again, due to the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption. And then we're seeing rapid escalation in the rate of residential assessment increases. I'm going to provide a preview. This will be the last slide, then I can stand for any questions, of the average homeowner analysis that we frequently show in our budget document, and I've shown in budget workshops in the past. These numbers are a bit preliminary, but I'd like to kind of walk through them quickly. And what this does is it shows the average home last year versus the average home in the upcoming year. So on line 2, you can see that the average home year over year increased by 29.6% from 351,000 all the way up to 455,000. The homeowner's exemption on line 3 increased by 25% from 100,000 to 125,000. But you can see that the taxable value on the next line increased by 31.5%. The increase in the homeowner's exemption did not keep up with the increase in the assessed value. You can see the levy rate on line 5 increasing by about 4.1%. And then you can see city taxes on line 6 going up by 36.9%. Now, if you look down below, you can see really what's driving that. So we do an analysis to see, what the increase in taxes would be with a 3% increase and with no increase, and to look at the factors for that. And you can see, I'll skip to the bottom, that on line 14, the taxes on that average home would go up by $368 regardless of any action that the city could take. On the right, you can see what's driving that. About $225 of that is the rolling off of the one-time relief that was available within the current fiscal year. The other $141 is burden shift, again, attributable to the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption and the rapid rate of growth on residential properties as compared to the commercial properties. That was all I had prepared, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Eric and Bob, for that presentation. I think it offered a lot of clarity. I just have a couple of questions. One of them is around the personal property tax exemption, which used to be $100,000 per year, and now that's up to $250,000. How did that impact commercial taxes? Do we have any preliminary numbers on that?
Council member, I'll take a stab at that. As I understand it, under House Bill 389, the increase to the personal property exemption should not impact or should not exacerbate that shift, because the relief that is being provided to commercial payers through that increase is being offset by the state.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
If I could just add one thing, that does not go into effect until next year.
Okay. Wonderful. And I had another question. I forgot it, so maybe I'll remember later.
You can do it in the roundup afterwards. Anything else before we? Great. Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Eric, that last slide that you had, will you bring back again just to remind us? I thought it was pretty impactful to see that we'd just be saving the average homeowner $45 because of the shifts if you took 0%.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. All right. Thank you, Bob. It was good to see you. Look forward to seeing you in person at some point. Thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Deanna and Bree that have joined us to give us an update. This is an information only item on our Pathways Master Plan. Good to see you both. There you go. Madam Mayor, council members, my name is Deanna Dupuy. I'm a comprehensive planner in the Planning and Development Services Department, and I'm here with Bree Brush from the Mayor's Office and Lana Graybill from the Office of Community Engagement, and we're happy to be providing an update on the Pathways Master Plan. Today, we'll be giving you a short overview of the plan, then providing a progress update, and then followed by our next steps with the planning process. But before we dive too far in it, I would like to take a second to remind everyone of the Greenbelt and that it took 50 years to build the pathway that we enjoy today, and that it all started with a plan. Our direction has been to build off the legacy of the Greenbelt and to develop a plan that's forward-thinking that provides an actionable strategy to expand pathways across the city of Boise. And in order to do that, we need a plan that's going to identify a network of non-motorized off-street pathways across the city. We're hoping that our plan will be able to provide implementation and policy recommendations so that our plan has longevity into the future. We'll be working to propose various pathway designs so we understand the level of effort needed to implement this system. And then at the end, we hope to have a prioritized list of pathway segments so we can begin implementation as soon as the plan is adopted. So Bree's going to give us a second on our progress to date.
Okay, so far with our work group and the city team, our consultant team, and all the feedback we've gathered from the public so far, we've been able to put together some draft goals for the system. We've reviewed the pathway system past and present, and then had that first round of outreach, which we just closed out a couple weeks ago. The system goals for the pathway should be able to make useful connections for people to get where they need to go, have equitable access throughout the city so that no matter where your neighborhood is, you have access to a pathway. And it should really preserve and connect the nature we love so much in our community. And the process we've enlisted so far focuses on implementing the plan once it's developed and completed, developing partnerships along the way so that we're not doing this alone, and really capturing the community voice and the feedback that we get. And we know an ambitious plan like this is possible because in 1976, we had just 2 miles of pathway, and today we have more than 55 miles. Deanna will tell you a little bit more about what we mean when we say pathway and what those might look like depending on where you are in the city.
Thanks, Bree. And when we did a review of the past pathway. So we looked through all our plans, and that's kind of the interesting thing when we found that mile number in 1976. And then we worked with our community to identify those future goals for the pathway system. But we wanted to look at what is our pathway system like today. You'll see the shared use path picture is probably our most known pathway, the Greenbelt. It's a paved path, 10 to 12 feet wide that accommodates two-way travel. We also have some pathways that are within or adjacent to roads, but separated from the roadway, such as the side path picture, which is the Federal Way Bikeway. We also have some of those along Hill Road. And then we have all across the city, unimproved paths, whether formal or informal, usually along a corridor. This is one along the Rittenbaugh Canal in Southeast Boise. And so we took an understanding of what these pathways are across our system today and did some data analysis to really build out what are we working with and how do we move forward to really build off our strengths. So we did some GIS analysis to understand the city's or our city's residents' proximity to pathways. And we were able to find that about 10% of Boiseans live within a half mile of a pathway. And we use this doing GIS and census data. You'll see the lime green buffer, that's a half mile from a pathway. And most of that coverage is along the Greenbelt, Federal Way Bikeway, kind of some are well-known longer regional pathways.
And we picked a half mile because that's on average the distance someone's willing to walk to connect to that safe corridor. We also wanted to understand pathway need across the city. So again, doing some GIS analysis, looking at census information, we analyzed several variables that indicate maybe perhaps a greater need for pathway, whether it's vehicle access or age if you're a vulnerable user. And so we were able to layer all of those indicators and create a gradient of high to low need for pathway. And we were able to identify a couple areas within the city that we think would benefit greatly from increased access. We have them circled here in yellow. For example, near Bora High School would be one of those higher need areas. And we did actually quite a bit of analysis that will definitely be in the final plan. But the goal of all that analysis was, yeah, this is interesting to know, but as we build our system, what are the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and challenges we're going to face? I think we're all aware that the Greenbelt is a strength. We have this great regional system that connects. And so how can we continue to build off of that strength as we build out the network? There's a lot of great opportunities, and that's probably the reason why we're working on this plan. We have the ability to create partnerships with the Ada County Highway District, whether it's connecting to on-street facilities or really looking within our right-of-way. And also leveraging partnerships with private development as the city builds out. How can we make sure that we're accessing those pathways? Of course, there's weaknesses that we're going to have to overcome. We have fragmented networks now, which have limited utility if you're looking to commute somewhere or even recreate if it's a short fragment. So we know that we're going to have to look at that to fill those gaps. And then there's going to be challenges that we can address in the plan, but they're going to be challenges as we move into implementation. So the geographic challenge of the West Bench, how do we get down the hill through Garden City to the Greenbelt? Challenges of just working with our irrigation districts to make sure that if we do have a pathway along an irrigation district, that it's safe for all users and that the district can continue their operations. So we wanted to understand our current system, but we also wanted to really work with our community to understand what their vision is for how our pathway system should grow and change. We had several outreach opportunities within the spring. We had an online survey, web map, and community meetings. Our online outreach was open for 5 weeks and we had a great response rate. We had over 2,000 responses to the survey, about 1,000 interactions on our web map, which is really great. We asked people, drop a pinpoint, draw a line of where you would want to go. So that was great feedback. And that online outreach was really to understand current pathway use, how people behave, so their transportation behavior, how do they get to school? So we just understand better about how people are using pathways or want to use pathways, and then address some of those barriers. Then what we were really happy about was we wanted to have a more informal conversation with our community about their vision. So we hosted 4 community meetings, 2 online, 2 in person, which I think we all felt after this year of doing a lot of online stuff, it was really great to be out in the park and see people face to face. And we were lucky enough to have a couple of council members and the mayor there too. So I think it was greatly appreciated to have that interaction. And honestly, the feedback we heard was largely positive. I think our community is really excited about this. And there's a sense of optimism that if we really do expand our pathway network, it's going to enhance the quality of life for all residents wherever you live. And that it's going to really provide opportunity to make useful connections that people can actually connect to downtown. They can connect to the grocery store, their schools. And with that, the idea that they could connect and not have to rely on a car and, not having to rely on a car is less driving, less traffic, and people are really happy about that. And this could actually present a real transportation choice if we expand the network. But we also wanted to hear from our community to understand what some concerns are, what they see, and their challenges that they see as we build this out. Safety definitely rose to the top. Safety of all users, whether you're on the pathway or you're connecting to the pathway, being mindful of having to cross dangerous roads or our community really wanted us to be aware of that and have that front of mind. Building off of that, we heard a lot of comments about as our city is growing and as more people are turning towards our pathway system, that there's a need for making sure all users are respectful, whether you're a commuter driving to work or biking to work, or you're an 8-year-old learning how to bike, that it's comfortable and that you're respectful of all users on that pathway. And then, of course, I think our community is aware that there are going to be challenges about increasing access to pathways. Our systems, our community is built out, and there are those geographic constraints. So they want us to be mindful of that and to be considering the whole city as we increase that access.
Madam Mayor. Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you. The folks who were giving this feedback, was there a way to tell if there are folks who are currently using bicycles to get around, or if these are folks, or is it a mix of folks who currently haven't embraced that transportation option?
Yeah. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez. Yes, we did ask in our online survey. We asked in our online survey, and then we also asked a separate question in person. We first asked where they were from in the city, so to understand that access to pathways, and then we did. We're able to, what's the right word? Like pivot the data. I'm thinking of a pivot table, but we're able to look at. We asked, how often do you use our pathway system? How do you use it? So to ask if they use it for recreation and or commute. So we do have that information. And then we asked, if you don't use our pathway system, why not? And some of the responses were, I don't have safe access to the pathway. It doesn't get me where I want to go. So yeah, yes. And then I'll let Bree wrap this up with our next steps.
Okay, the next steps in the pathway plan will be to draft a network of pathways. What will it physically look like? Where would they be someday? Any supporting policy recommendations that the city would have to implement to start building these. Pathway segment prioritization based on all of the input we got, all the lines on the map and our consultants' geographic analysis. What segments would be a higher priority and what ones might be a really long-term down the road project. And then our second round of public outreach in July. And we will stand for any questions.
It looks like you might have covered it so well that there are none right now. We really appreciate you guys have come in front of us a couple times with updates and really appreciate it.
And Mary,
Sure, go ahead.
just a real quick comment. This last year, one of the tough parts about being new city council members, you didn't really get to meet and work with a lot of different staff. And this was sort of my first experience to really team up with Lana, Deanna, Bree, and Elizabeth, who's not here as well. And so being able to interact with you and the public was really exciting for me. And it was really cool to go to the public meetings and see how excited people were about engaging with all of you and the different ideas that they were bringing to the table. And I've been involved with a lot of public outreach before in the past. Usually, there's one or two people at each session who are fired up about something and aren't on board with the plan for a variety of different reasons. To me, this was sort of like an opposite feeling where everybody was on board for the plan for a variety of different reasons, whether they had just moved here, they'd been here for a long time, they were a walker, a biker, whatever it may be. And so I just want to say job well done up to this point. It's been exciting to work with you. I've learned a lot, both from you three and the community as well. So thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I want to thank staff, in a year when it was really hard to reach people. I think there was an unprecedented amount of response to the outreach on this. I know a lot of it was due to your hard work, so thanks for that. I think the challenge before us is going to be the implementation. And we're going to need everybody on board, both to figure out how to pay for it, but also how to overcome some of those really big barriers, especially the safety along canal banks. But knowing how much support this effort seems to have, I think we're up to it. So thanks, everyone.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
I just wanted to echo job well done and ask, has the kind of initial outreach to the canal companies already started to happen, or is that something that will happen later once the plan's kind of fleshed out a little bit more?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Whittings, Deanna and I have visited in person with the a couple of the canal companies to share information on the plan, and one of them is represented on our work group that we've worked with throughout this process so that we can make sure their concerns are always addressed.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you both. This is super exciting. I know that they have been appreciated the involvement of council members and also the involvement of the public that really has remained high throughout all of this. So thanks for the work. Look forward to what's next.
Thank you.
All righty, we are going to move on now to welcome Wendy. Hello, Wendy, through Zoom to the zoning update. I think I also saw Don Elliott on there somewhere out there, so he's joined us. And why don't you just take it away?
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Indeed, you get both Don and I today. So today I'm going to be giving you a very brief update on the status of the zoning code rewrite project. And then Don Elliott with Clary and Associates is going to take us into a few more of the details that many of you have asked about our module 2, which is our upcoming work. As you remember, the project overview, which has stayed very stable, the goal of the project is to replace our 55-year-old zoning code. We're implementing Blueprint Boise, which of course is our comprehensive plan, as well as backing up our overall mission, goals, and vision around the city for everybody. Our hope is to fully engage the community and really turn our code into something that is user-friendly, is better organized, incentivizes great design, as well as more streamlined through the development process. The project is broken into 5 phases. We've already completed 2 of them. We're in phase 3, which by far is the meatiest part of the project. This is the phase that we're actually producing 3 modules of new zoning code. We're partway through, so we've completed our first draft module 1, and we have 2 more modules to complete. The bulk of this phase will create the consolidated draft zone, the draft zoning code, which will be released in phase 4, along with the updated zoning map. And phase 5 is our final revision as well as adoption. To lay this out on a timeline, right now we have completed our module 1 for public input, and we're beginning our public input process this week, actually, so that we can garner input from people across the city in all walks of life. Phase 3 will continue throughout the course of this calendar year, and we're targeting a full public draft to be released in phase 4 at the beginning of next year, deep in the winter of FY22. The project health remains solid, that we're on scope, schedule, and budget. We are on track still to have an adopted code as of December of 2022. Our recent deliverables have come out both in memo as well as being available to the public. Our survey 2, where we reached out across the city to residents and got their input about changes, as well as module 1 itself. So those 2 were released on April 22nd to the public, and then our next deliverable, we expect that to be released to the public as of August 23rd, and that will be our module 2 public draft. Before I turn it over to Don to talk about module 2 and where we're going with the project, I want to brief you on module 1. As you recall, module 1 is around our zoning districts and our uses. So this is where we're relooking at the zoning districts across the whole city and making sure that we have a modern take on what's allowed in each zone, looking at the overlays, any type of unique land controls that we have in those, as well as design standards at the highest level. There are some major differences to our current code. The first and probably most noticeable thing is that we have condensed our zones into fewer, and we've renamed them to be more applicable to what's in the zone. In addition, new housing types will be allowed across all residential zones in an attempt to handle some of the housing crisis that we're currently facing. We will also allow more small-scale commercial in some of the residential zones, and we're creating some new zones that allow mixed-use development. These summary points on the major differences on module 1 is what we'll be taking out to the city. So across the city, we are reaching out on various different methods to make sure that we are spreading the word about the new zoning module 1. We have several different Zoom meetings. We have several different in-park meetings, similar to what Deanna just mentioned about pathways. We're very excited to get outside. So these meetings will begin starting on Friday, and there will be, once again, be a mix of Zoom meetings as well as in person in the park. For those that want a specific discussion on the modules, then we have office hours that are open, office hours with the planner. Everyone can sign up online, as well as another community-wide survey. And all of this information is up on our public website for the project. At a very high level, after this becomes module 2. And module 2 is where we really shift gears and start talking about design and development standards. And we expect that to take over the course of the summer. I would ask that if you have any questions of me, we pause until the end so that Dawn can speak to module 2 on significantly more detail. Dawn?
Yes, thank you. And it's great to be there virtually and hope that we will be able to be there in person in the not too distant future. So I was able to appear, it's almost a year and a half now, at one point before council at that point, and I look forward to doing it again. You are ahead of schedule. This is amazing. This is wonderful. So I wanted to just hit some highlights about things that you may be getting questions on or you have concerns about. I'm not going to walk you through module 1 or module 2, although I'll be very happy to answer any questions about them. The topics that I thought would be useful to highlight in this presentation are these: inclusion and equity. It has been very clear and highlighted many times, the vision of a city for everyone, and it's hot all around the country, but particularly in Boise right now. Housing options, which has been a discussion from the very beginning of this project. Building form controls. Neighborhood protection for the character of existing neighborhoods, and then the user friendliness of the old code. We'll just wind up on that. So next. Inclusion and equity. I wanted to just make one major point. Maybe it'll be a topic of discussion later on. Often when you talk about, when people have been talking much more about equity in the past few years, and particularly the past year, and frankly, focusing on a very key fact, which is zoning can easily be used to reinforce exclusion and to limit mobility. Those are very important topics, and we've tried to make them a substantial part of our work today with the Citywide Advisory Committee. Often that conversation focuses on process. We just need to get people to the table. We're not doing a good enough job of getting a diverse group of people, income-wise, ethnically, historically. We just need more different voices at the table. That is clearly true. And frankly, to go beyond it, and in some ways to make sure that the voices that you know from side conversations, from neighborhood interactions, from other things that are not showing up in the public record, get on the public record. People are concerned about this. And we've tried to do that and we'll continue. But I wanted to make the second point, which is that that's not enough. The rules in the ordinance itself, the uses that are permitted and how much review they get, and the quality of connectedness in the communities and landscaping and parking and everything else, and the process by which decisions are made in Boise are just as important. I often feel like it's kind of a cop-out. If you're not careful, you put all the effort into saying, we just gotta get the right people to the table. And I will say, often in my experience, even if they're at the table, zoning makes it harder for them to find places to live and to educate their families and to live the life that Boise and other cities would like to offer all their residents. So we're trying to keep the focus not just on process, which is very important, but to say, no, focus on inclusiveness in the substance of the ordinance as well. That is equally or more important. I wouldn't say more important, it's equally important. Don't quit when you focus on process, get to the substance. Next one, Wendy. Housing options, no secret to all of you. You had some very difficult decisions to make earlier on the housing bonus ordinance. Obviously, I just want to reiterate that whenever we're questioned on this, the answer is read Blueprint Boise. It's very clear. And if anything, the need to help create housing for everyone is even more challenging than it was back when Blueprint Boise was adopted. So this is not something that's made up. It's not from out of town. It's not only because of influx in the past few years. This was part of Boise's vision for a long time, and the need has only gotten greater. I want to highlight what may be a topic of discussion. Many in many communities, and that is, as Wendy said, allowing more types of housing in more neighborhoods. Let's just call it for what it is. There are many changes proposed in the code in the draft 1 module, and they're footnoted. Where is it changed? Well, those are footnoted. Among them are allowing duplex, triplex, and fourplex homes in the current R1 A, B, and C districts, the current ones. I mean, we don't have a new R1A going forward, but those lands that are now in R1 A, B, and C, subject to, and there's both things going on here. The draft says allow them. It also says subject to controls on how much of the lot they occupy, architectural features that are like single family homes near them, height, facade articulation, limits on the amount of the facade that could be driveway or garage, lots and lots of controls, open space in the backyard. There are lots of controls, I would say even perhaps more than we see in some other cities where we're working on this issue, to say it's got to fit in. And you can't just buy a bunch of blocks and make big stuff. That would still go to the Planning Commission. But in terms of individual structures, loosening up on how many units could be in there. Yes, there's still parking. Yes, there's open space. Yes, there's the usual controls on impacts. But I want to ensure that council understands the significance of this. It's really important. And it's something many cities are struggling with. Don't just envision somebody coming in and building something new. The proposal on the table is it becomes a permitted use. If your current single family house it does meet these standards, it could be a duplex. It's not all new construction. You could change that if you'd like in your public discussions, but I'm trying to shine a spotlight on it. It is also one of the most powerful things you can do for affordability because it doesn't count on a broad new construction center and building yourself out of this. This takes advantage of your current housing stock. With the left hand, it says we could house more people. And with the right hand, it says if it fits in with the character of those neighborhoods. Next slide. Building form has had a lot of discussion. For those who are not zoning geeks, building form just means focusing a little bit more on the fit, not only residential. I'm not going to beat that drum anymore, but even in commercial and mixed use areas, institutional areas, making sure the building fits in with the context better than it did in the old code and better, frankly, than all old zoning ordinances did it. So increasing that and saying a lot of people are willing to have flexibility as long as it really fits, as long as it feels like it belongs there. And less on the specific use. And this is a major debate happening all over the country, not just because of affordable housing, but because if mixing uses allows for shorter driving trips and shorter vehicle and less vehicle emissions, and it makes it more likely you'd ride your bike. Lots of good planning reasons that say we should allow more flexibility in how these buildings are used over time and focus a little bit more on whether they fit in and will age well and be something the city's proud of over the long term. Now, there are lots of ways we're doing this. As we said earlier, lightening up on uses. I just walked through and Wendy mentioned more types of housing in more places. But it's not just housing. There's also allowing a wider range of non-housing uses in commercial areas, not only along streets, but in activity centers. And there's a lot of focus in Module 1 on making the kinds of either small neighborhood activity centers or medium-sized centers or downtown being a large center as places that hopefully can grow with a wider mix of uses to reinforce the transit system and to build transit ridership through proximity to what you're trying to grow, and which Blueprint Boise is very clear about being a priority. And then how do we do the fit? Well, I'm repeating myself, but you look at things like the height of the building, the scale, the length of the building. Is it longer? Have they just taken something that was fine when it was small grained fabric of this street or this area and overdid it and bought a lot of lots and put it together? Well, don't do that. Don't allow that. Lot coverage, how the fronts of the buildings relate to the street and the buildings around them. Now, I'm putting this slide up here because a lot of that is not in Module 1. It's in Module 2, which is how do you lay it out? How do you build it? What are the quality standards? What are the design standards? And I think some folks who've been engaged in this conversation are a little frustrated by that. Gee, we don't know how to really react to the uses and the districts you've proposed until we see what you're going to do or propose as design standards and parking standards and open space standards and landscaping standards and lighting standards. That's coming. For those of you who have delved into module 1, you can tell there's a lot to swallow there. There's a lot to absorb. And doing it in pieces allows people to focus on it piece by piece. The door is never shut. I expect we'll get some comments after module 2 saying, you know, I was kind of okay with this in module 1, but I don't think these standards are strong enough, or they're too strong. I thought you were on the right track in module 1, but having read what you're doing in module 2, I got my doubts as to whether that's going to work together. We still insist that it is better to do it in pieces, because what we've put out in module 1 is the structure, the skeleton, the framework that you have to build from. You can't talk about parking till you talk about the uses. You can't talk about landscaping till you talk about what uses are allowed where in the city and what would be appropriate. So that's how we're doing it this way. And again, the last bullet here is, as activity centers are created, another part of form-based controls is, how does it work as a center, not just a bunch of pad sites that people have to drive to and from and can't drive from one to the next or can't walk easily? How do you control the form of these activity centers so that as they densify to support the transit system and allow people to get things with fewer car trips and shorter car trips and more walking and biking, how do we make sure it works together and is not just kind of a, well, I sold this lot to this one and this lot to this one, and then we had to get the land off and sell it to somebody else, to make it work together. So those are the form approaches. Next one, Wendy. Neighborhood protection. So it is very clear, and this has been up in the citywide advisory committee. Blueprint Boise says both things. It says densify some areas so we can help build a transit system for all of the reasons that we all know, and protect neighborhood character. It says both. And we are having good conversations in the advisory committee about how do you balance them. And I think the level of interaction and the goodwill, the willingness to listen to people who feel very strongly about one side or the other of this inherent tension is very high. I think there's been a lot of a good engagement with discussion saying, okay, I get it. You can't just say no change, and you can't just say protect my neighborhood and I don't really care what's happening outside. And you also can't say, hey, we got to build transit and densify and mixed use and walkability, and I don't care that much about the neighborhood. You can't do that. No one's doing that. Everybody's engaging in a reasoned debate and discussion about how you balance those goals. So what do? One of the things that we will do, and again, it's in module 2, it's not in module 1, is when you have, every city has this, they have places where you have commercial center zoning or an activity center or a street frontage that has stores on it, and it backs up against houses. It backs up against neighborhoods that the citizens care very deeply about. And so one of the things that we proposed is to say, you know, just build in some protections automatically without having to negotiate it on a case-by-case basis. Build it in that when that happens, building heights have to sit down. If there is outdoor lighting for parking areas, it has to step down to residential type heights. Increase the setbacks between these two to give more buffer, increase the screening and the buffering next to these boundaries. And in some cases, and this, we haven't debated this, we haven't discussed this, but some cities say, oh, and I also don't want the drive-through lanes or the cars or the parking areas circulating on that part of the site between a commercial or a mixed use or a multifamily building and the single family neighborhood next door. These edge issues, how do you transition from two goods? Stable neighborhood, good. Activity center that supports transit, good. How do you blend these two? And our experience has been, build the protections in so people understand we don't have to negotiate this each time. And when somebody buys a commercial property, they realize I'm not going to be able to go to my maximum height up against that neighborhood. It's going to have to step down. And I may not be able to put as much building on that lot because it's got to be set back and buffered better from the neighborhood. That's just being good neighbors. Codify it to try to give more comfort and to automatically bring in some neighborhood protection. Next one, and I'm almost done. User-friendly. Our proposal, and what you can see it in the table of contents on module 1, is organize all of the contents in 7 chapters. I think it's a radical simplification of what you have now. 1101, general provisions and definitions are kind of self-explanatory. You have 3 very long, very complicated, Barbara Valley, other places where you have adopted very detailed neighborhood building specific districts. Those are at the end just because they would interrupt the flow. And if you live in those areas, you know where to look for them. But if you don't live in those 3 areas with detailed standards, then you're probably going to look at 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. 2 says what district I am. 3 is what uses are allowed there. 4 says how do they have to lay it out? How tall can it be? How close to the street? Landscaping, lighting, all that module 2 content. And 5 says, and who gets to approve this? Is it staff? Is it planning commission? Is it city council? But that's why this is, we think, much simpler. Chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 answer 90% of the questions that will come in, and we think is much more intuitive way where people could say, well, what is my question? Parking? Okay, I'm going to find it in 1104. That's the development design. If my question is, can they do a hotel there? I'm going to find that in the uses, 1103. So, and we have put out there, we haven't put all the drawings in yet, but the right-hand side of this slide shows a 2-page spread. So that for each zone district, there'd be a purpose statement, a graphic, not regulation, a 3D graphic picture depicting the style, the spread outedness, or the closeness, or the height, and the street relationship of this intended area. And then on the right-hand side are key facts like how tall can the buildings be, setbacks, lot coverage, things like that. This is not the whole code. But our experience is for many citizens who don't want to be zoning geeks, they just want to know what's being proposed and whether they should be concerned. We think this layout is a very helpful way for them to say, okay, I get it. And the lower part of the left page says, guys, let's not fool anybody. You still got to read the parking chapter. You still got to read the design standards. That's not on here. But this answers, well, they say they're going to rezone this. How tall could the buildings be? The answer is here. So we hope that is helpful to you. We could cover many things, and I'll turn it over for answering any questions and any discussion you'd like to have. And perhaps Wendy will be willing to answer questions too. So thanks.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy and Dawn. I understand that this is very much a citizen engaged process. Will there be an opportunity, much like we did when you were kicking off the project, to meet up and get council input on this module 2? Because I have very strong opinions about garages, and I would like those to hopefully be part of it.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to that.
Madam Mayor. Thanks for the presentation and the update. I know you're doing a lot of work, coordinating a lot of different interests and having a lot of meetings. So I appreciate hearing from you in a public way like this. One concern that we have talked about, I think way back in the beginning, and then more briefly in an update that I have, is that the layering of these modules could create what is essentially a ratchet effect. People start with use, they have preconceived notions, they fight for and they advocate the set of positions that they believe about how land should be used. Then we layer on form, and they have preconceived notions, and that adds another web and another layer of regulation. And then they layer on the next module, and what we end up with something is much, much tighter than perhaps what we intended to create in the beginning. And so I was wondering if you could help us understand, you made reference to it, Mr. Elliott, the process for potentially going back and, for instance, looking back at module 1 as somebody becomes more comfortable with what the module 2 form regulations might be, and the mechanism that we will use to prevent this from just being a series of steps where everything gets tighter and tighter and tighter and more restrictive as we go through.
Great question. And a very thoughtful question. I think I'll give my answer in 3 parts. We're doing these 3 modules, and each one having discussions internally about the balancing of interests, and then putting it out for the public and doing public engagement to try to explain that. When we get the 3rd module out, we do loop back. We put them all together and we highlight what has had to change. For example, your example is a very good one. Sometimes when people come through and they say, well, I'd really like this design solution, we have to say, that's pretty tight. If you're going to do that, if that's what you really want, we should go back and loosen up on the uses a little bit more, because if you're going to, these things need to be in balance. They need to be not making it impossible to develop or driving the cost up in ways that you don't expect. So A, we look back and put it into a consolidated draft and try to highlight those things. B, we will work when we get there with staff, your staff, to test it on various sites, both unbuilt or built sites, to say, is this having unintended consequences? We thought it was going to allow development of the following era. We thought we followed the plot. We thought it would allow it. And upon testing, we say, that's too strict. That has unintentionally put too many conditions on what happens here. It'd be unlikely that someone could do this or do it affordably or do it in a good way. The third part is kind of softer than that, and I'll be happy to have a follow-up question. I kind of consider it my job and our job as we lead these discussions, especially in the advisory committee, to point out those tensions. I don't think it's a one-way ratchet. We have to point out and say, boy, that's pretty strict. We can tell you that's stricter than most places do because of the following possible unintended consequences of that. And to say exactly what I said earlier, if you really think that's, well, it's up to me to say that could have some unintended consequences. Do you realize that's very expensive to do? It sounds very good, but it's very expensive. We recommend against it, or we recommend that if you're going to do that, we go back and look at some other standards and see if we can figure out ways that compensate for it to keep the development, keep it possible to develop at reasonable prices in Boise.
Thank you very much. No follow-up question. I really appreciate that this is on your mind and that apparently you've self-ordained yourself to take that role. So that's great, because it's everybody in this room knows this is very top of mind for me. And so I appreciate that it's something that you're thinking about. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, thanks for being here today, Don. Thanks, Wendy. It's good to see you. Not surprisingly, I have a couple of comments and questions. Probably the first one is thank you for putting all of the housing types in all of the residential zones. I think it's a great start. I think, as Councilmember Bajent alluded to, figuring out what those controls, the subject to will be the key in learning whether or not we'll be successful in actually getting those housing types in all zones. But I think we're on the right track. I have a couple of questions. I love that we condensed the number of uses. I have some concerns about the names. I really hate to use the word density in the name of a zone. And just wondered if you could comment, and large lot also, just as a name of a zone. To me, first of all, it is not very clear what that means versus, there's all kinds of large lots versus what it might imply. So I just wonder if you could comment on how you came up with those names and whether there's been any discussion about helping the public and the users understand what that zone is really intended for without using words that maybe trigger other responses.
Good question. Yeah, we've had a hard time settling on names, and the names are by no means final. I'm glad you raised it. I will say at a personal level, when I review it, I sometimes look at it and say, I think this could be more user-friendly. I think this could be more intuitive for people to understand. And so, to be honest, we've gone back and forth between about 3 different ideas about how to name them. They're not final, and I think we can do better, is the short answer. I'm more interested that we get the kind of, in module 1 and 2, what the uses are and what the dimensions are, what the design, let's get it built right. But I would be very happy to go back and revisit those. The only thing I think one of the things that put our thumb on the scale to not make as much change as we might have was that so many people who are deeply engaged and very interested in preserving the quality of their life and their neighborhood live in the R1 or B and R1C districts, and renaming them leads you into, do you want to have to re-educate everybody about the names? Now, having said that, Many cities do, and it goes just fine. You just, by the time we get to the end of this process, everybody gets it. It used to be called X, and they're now saying it's Y. And when I look at the spectrum of names, I can kind of agree. That is a better way of laying out what the different types of places in Boise. So that's my only answer, is that we were a little skittish about renaming R1, B, and C before we had a good discussion like this. So.
Follow. Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that one of our goals was to allow small scale commercial in some residential zones. The R3 zone is the one that seems to have a bit of it, but it brings me to my second question, which is, do we really need an R3 zone, or should we aspire to have more high density housing built as only high density housing without mixed use?
Well, the way it's drafted now, and please correct me, I'm trying to answer you intelligently while skipping around in the document itself. The difference between R3 and the lowest intensity mixed use neighborhood is conceptually. There's a place in most cities, and I think a place in Boise, given Blueprint Boise, for kind of neighborhood scale things that would involve a mix of residential and non-residential. It just has to be small. We can all visualize nice, smaller areas that have, sometimes they're small multifamily on a corner, sometimes they're commercial, sometimes they're a mix. So that's where that's supposed to be. In R3 and in high density, we could do exactly what you say. We could split it and say, well, there's high density housing, period. And the direction we kind of took was, there should be a high density housing zone district that everybody understands. That's what that's about. And I think what we've tried to draft is to say, and on the ground floors of that, you could do small scale non-residential. You couldn't walk in and do a freestanding Taco Bell. You can't go in and do a freestanding dry cleaner, even though people need dry cleaners and would like to have them, maybe not so far from their house. It's the point of that R3 is you could do completely residential stuff. It's not a mandate, but you also could say this, I could do a coffee shop. I could do a small scale thing in the same building on the ground floor. And if it does not say that in module 1, it's because I'm trying to do two things at once. And that was the intent. That you don't have to mix it up. You could do all residential, but you also could do supportive, very small scale, non-residential in the ground floors of the same buildings.
Thank you. That leads me to my third question then is, this round, we're supposed to be identifying the uses, and it does seem to me that the uses are still pretty paltry in that first ground floor mixed use of the all residential units. And so wonder what process we might think about to review those and see if there's a little bit more we could add or different ways to add it in the use table. As I'm comparing the use table with the old use table, I'm seeing a few places where we might stretch a little bit, and also a few places where we have a lot of existing uses that are no longer going to be allowed. And so maybe some forum to have a conversation about those would be helpful.
Okay.
And otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing the parking standards to ensure that we can actually do away with the parking overlay districts.
If I could respond briefly to your comment about the uses, I want all of council and whoever is watching to understand. I have said publicly before, the nature of the work we do with you, with staff, with the committees, and with the elected and appointed officials is, it's not done till it's done. But we have to put a draft on the table. So I would encourage you, Councilwoman, mark it up and say, I think you should be allowed, take a magic marker, print out those pages, or put a sticky note on an electronic version and just say, I'd like to see this use allowed in these districts. It's not done. You were very polite in your comment about, how do we do this? Comment, send it in. We expect to get a lot. And I frankly, we don't want to redo it all the time, because then you get a version control problem. But we would take all the comments we get, not only from you and others, but often staff looks at it again along the way and says, you know what, we missed something. We don't, or Clarion raises it and says, we still don't understand why you're not allowing this. And somebody says, well, okay, then let's think about it again. So when we get to the consolidated draft where we bring it together, we will make further changes to the use table and we will footnote them that is a change since the last time you saw this, so that those of you who just want to focus, yeah, I was pretty satisfied with it, I wonder what they've done with it since then, will be able to look at the footnotes and say, okay, I should focus on those. Those are changes that happened over the past year as we've worked through the use table. So.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry. I started looking up there.
Yeah, you can never quite tell. A couple things. Wendy, Dawn, thank you so much. Dawn, I appreciate one of the points that you brought up earlier, that a lot of these rules don't just have to apply to new construction, but could also apply to houses that already exist. I've been thinking a lot recently about the average amount of people per square foot of houses in Boise, and how we see in some areas that that's declined. And I was walking through an area of our town yesterday and saw all sorts of different old houses that used to be one family that have been since subdivided and tend to attract a younger group of people who also are creative folks, who are restaurant workers, all sorts of different things. And so I love the idea of being able to look at some of our existing areas and the housing types that are already there, and doing different uses with those housing types and exploring ways to actually get more people per square footage. So love that you brought that up, and would love to see that highlighted. One question I have is on one of your slides, your inclusion and equity slide, one of the bullet points says avoiding regulations that are likely to be used to exclude disadvantaged residents. And I guess I'm just curious with the work that's done so far, if you've noticed or seen any areas to improve, or other areas that we need to be looking at stronger to address that kind of specific bullet point.
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't have a, let me answer it conceptually. The short answer to your question is no. I feel like what we've put out in module 1, we know it's going to change, but we're hoping people are reading it and making comments. I do not feel like that there is embedded disadvantage to some folks in what we've put out there so far. I think it's a move forward. I think we have opened up new opportunities, and so that's true. But we got to keep looking at it in module 2 and module 3. I just want to be. It's a rich topic, and for example, in module 2. When we look at parking, when we look at landscaping, we look at dimensions and lot sizes, and we finalize, okay, this is a minimum lot size in this zone district. The larger you make it, the fewer houses can be built on that land as it develops, and the more it's likely to be more folks with more resources. And so we're going to have to look at dimensions, and then we're going to have to look in the process part, module 3. I love local government. I've made my living trying to work with local government to make good decisions and guide their cities the way they want to do. But I will tell you, there are some systemic problems in the way that folks engage with local governments in many cities. I'm not saying Boise in particular, because if you are a well-educated person who has had a lot of advantages, you can cross that bridge pretty easily. You can figure out how to be effective in what you say to your local government. If you're not, and you have less education and you do not understand exactly how local government works or how to engage, it's harder. So even in installment 3, I think we need to try to figure out, how do you design these processes with less kind of inherent biases? And once again, I want to be very clear. This is by no means an issue unique to Boise. It's unique to every local government that I've ever worked with. But so all 3 of those things. Now, let me go one step further, just because it might be good discussion topic. One way to promote affordable housing more affordable housing is to allow more development. And that has its supporters and some opponents. Another one is to say, yeah, we could replace this lower intensity housing with more units. They could redevelop it. The guy could buy it, tear down the houses, build more units. We've now replaced 10, I'm making this example up, 10 with 40. We helped affordable housing. But it's very likely that affordability level is not going to be what was there before. If it was older style housing, it's often more expensive. And so this raises the debate, which we will have along the way. To what extent should some neighborhoods be protected from more extensive change? Because they are actually pretty affordable now. They are pretty affordable now, and anything that would be done would be less affordable than what there is now. So that's the kind of thing zoning can do. Zoning can be used to say, less change here, not much change here. We're going to protect this. And zoning is designed to exclude. We don't want it to be an exclusionary tool, but for example, the discussion is going to come up. We're pretty affordable. Why are you allowing new types of housing in our neighborhood? We're already affordable. Leave us alone. The more you go down that path of leave us alone, either because it's affordable or because we're unique, because we're not comfortable with much change, the more you run the risk of what you just said, of zoning being used in ways which sound good on paper, but the truth is they do tend to exclude people. The more you carve out little pieces of the city and say, well, we're not going to have much change here, we're not going to have much change here, we're not going to have much change here, the more you force the change onto other parts of the city. The market doesn't go away. Market says, if I can't do it here, I'll try to do it over there. And that, I will just tell you, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, when you watch the dynamic of that in different cities, it tends usually to be the more affluent and privileged parts of the city that get protected, and the parts that are less so tend to get the major impacts of change. And the point of the bullet was we just need to keep our eye on that as we go down the road and make sure that everybody's comfortable that when we are protecting areas or saying less change in those areas, we are comfortable with the reasoning behind it, and we're comfortable with the likely market response to that and who might bear the brunt of that type of zoning. Sorry, it's a much longer answer than you wanted, but it's a very rich topic for discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Don. Madam Mayor, I have a somewhat related follow-up question, but I can hold knowing that there's two. Okay. So within that same bullet point, a lot of times when I think about how we build our cities and how it limits opportunities for folks, I do oftentimes think a lot about transportation. And what I'm curious about with our zoning rewrite and our zoning plan, that's very unique to Boise because of the way that we operate and own our own streets. Included in the planning process are the recommendations for street types, volumes, street feel, speeds in those types of areas. Is that included in part of that, knowing that that's potentially one of those tools that creates disadvantage?
The short answer is generally not. Zoning mostly aims at private property outside the public right-of-way. It gets into street furniture, landscaping, relationship, closeness, walkability, visual interest along the streets. Zoning usually does not. Some codes do, but and we can talk about it if you'd like, but usually they don't, because in the end, the Public Works Department, the Streets Department, or Ada County Highways has control over those areas. And so it is more likely in most processes that the long-term transportation planning for the area guides what kind of zoning we write to align with it, rather than zoning trying to drive the transportation system or trying to modify the transportation system.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. It's good to see you, Don. Good to see you, Wendy. So first of all, I was really pleased to see inclusion and equity on your slide deck. But I really would like for you, Don, to flesh out a little bit about what you were saying. I found that to be very compelling, what you were talking about in terms of having people from those marginalized groups be at the decision-making table. And I found it really compelling that you said that that's not enough. I'd like to give you an opportunity to flesh that out a little bit more and hear what your recommendations are for how do we make use of those moves, which are positive, but obviously they could be better. What could we be doing better?
Well, okay. Just to clarify, do you want me to focus on the process or the substance? It sounds like you want me to talk a little bit more about the process barriers. Is that right?
I'll take whatever you're giving, Don.
Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about a process. One of the interesting things that's happened over the past year, especially during COVID, is that because we couldn't meet in person, cities got very creative about trying to do online stuff in order to try to get more engagement. In my experience, and that's good, the numbers in most cities went up. Wow, we used to only get a few people at this meeting. Now we got a lot of people logging into this meeting. So part of it is using different styles of engagement or channels of engagement to do it. I will tell you, and once again, none of these comments are specific to Boise. I'm making general comments. The numbers went up, but I'm not sure the diversity of opinion went up. I think there were many more people, just based on my personal experience watching some meetings, who were watching. Many of them, I think, only watched. They were not comfortable weighing in. And I actually think in many cities, they were not any more diverse or any more low-income people, any more women-headed households, any more disabled-headed households than there were before. As a matter of fact, I'll stick with that comment. I don't think they expanded. So people felt good. We're reaching new people. That is a good thing. So few people really bother to engage. Local government loves it when more people engage. But so A, we have to keep more channels, but B, I'm not convinced that, for example, saying, well, we got to keep all these tools that we developed during COVID and we got to keep doing them because our numbers went up. I think, and I would love to hear your council's response to this. We have to get better at reaching out to entire neighborhoods or demographics that have never participated in these decisions and proactively try to engage them, not just have meetings in parks, not just meetings at their neighborhood meeting, but seeking out people that we think may have an insight as to what that demographic thinks or that neighborhood thinks or that racial or ethnic group feels about these proposals, even if not very many folks in that demographic have taken the chances to engage. So we broaden the channels, you do more of it, and then you watch to see who's not there. And I think cities have just got to get a lot better at proactively saying, look, we don't know who speaks for this neighborhood. We've tried, but we do know folks who in the neighborhood that we could ask. We need to proactively go out and not assume they speak for the neighborhood, but to seek out those voices. And then frankly, we need to help articulate them, knowing that those are real feelings those are real feelings. It's not a statistically valid survey, but if they're not going to engage despite the best efforts, to try to engage on behalf of those perspectives and bring them into the process.
Don, I really appreciate that. Something that I think we learned last year as we were working on our census is we did reach out to those informal community leaders. They don't necessarily head a neighborhood association or a nonprofit, but they are just people who the community has chosen to trust. And they have this leadership component to who they are. And I'm wondering if that's something we need to look at is perhaps not letting go of those relationships that we forged last year as we were working on our census, our local complete count. And I know it's something I've discussed with Council Member Halliburton of perhaps putting together some sort of a citizens academy where folks are able to learn more about how their local government works. I am one of those people that you're talking about, Don. I had very little interaction with the city of Boise until I ran for office and had the honor of sitting at this dais with these colleagues. And it's been learning by doing. And it's very humbling to recognize all that it takes for our city to run as well as it does. But I think with that entryway, that welcome for folks to not be afraid of this edifice, of this entity and recognize that they too can participate in creating our city as it grows and evolves into what we want it to be, and to retain what it still has, which is a certain level of grace in the way we interact with each other. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, Don.
Thanks. And we're going to close up with Elaine's or the council president's final question, and then we've got to head into executive.
Thank you. It looks like we have enough time, so I have one final question. In the mixed use zoning districts that we created, there's the neighborhood one, and then there's the activities center one, and then there's the downtown one, and then the street oriented. What I fail to see is an opportunity to redevelop some of the street oriented commercial that we have, commonly known as gray fields. Don, I know you know that term, into something better. And wonder if you could comment why you determined that the mixed use district along those corridors might not push the bar a little bit higher in terms of form.
Well, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on doing that. Essentially, for those of you who haven't waded into Module 1, the Mixed Use Activity Center is a major tool, too big to be right on your corner and have you feel comfortable. It's supposed to get jobs and people near transit. So those are medium, not downtown, but not small scale, it's in between. And that's the transit building tool. But you have to have a nodal system. If people are spread out evenly along a corridor, you don't get transit ridership, because if the bus stops everywhere, then it doesn't go fast enough for people to ride it. You've got to have a nodal system. So in between, it's an attempt to create a lower scale of development. And often in those areas, the whole parcel is only 1/2 block deep or 1 block deep. And then behind it, you get to houses. And people can understand when you're at an intersection and there's an activity center, there are going to be some impacts from traffic and stuff. But if you're just in between intersections and your home is behind the commercial strip that's along there, you're very worried. I think some of those homeowners are very worried that if you go too dense along the street and it's only 1/2 block deep or a block deep, it's going to be pretty hard to prevent it from having impacts on you, even if it steps down. So the short answer to your question is, it is the shallowness of many of those lots and the desire to not have most of the density in between the transit supporting nodes that led us to that approach. But I am very happy to rethink it if you think there's more opportunity to balance that in a way that would open up new gray fields in between the intersections in ways that we can also kind of reassure the neighborhoods behind them. This will work. This will not result in harm to your neighborhood. So,
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Don. It was great to see you both.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we go into executive session, personnel, land acquisition, records exempt from public disclosure, pending probable litigation, communicate with risk management regarding pending probable claims, labor contract, Idaho Code 742061B C D F I and J.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Great. We will be back in here at 6 o'clock and the meeting will start again for those of you that are watching online or visiting here. And we'll see you then. Thanks.